Here we go. I'm Don Lovett. Welcome to the ACT-IAC IoT Working Group Workshop. Today we're going to welcome our guest speaker, Mike Ryder. I'll let Pete do the introduction, but first let me introduce Pete and share a little bit about his background. Pete Saronis is the founder and CEO of Dotson Bridges, where he works in a variety of engagements to help business executives, government officials. He's got 30 years of leadership experience, primarily in the government and some industry work as well. Pete launched Dotson Bridges several years ago, 2015. And since then, he's been working with all kinds of people in federal agencies. He was prior able to serve in the presidential administration for 4 different administrations as a chief technology officer at the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Education. So take it away, Pete.
Thank you, Don, and I appreciate the intro. I rarely get that. So yeah, folks, I'm super excited. Again, this is going to be kind of a quick fireside chat. I will say that I will be in my Dotson Bridges world featuring Menlo Security not too far in the distant future. More to come on that, but we'll get a taste today, because when I met Mike Ryder recently and found out what his company and what his passion is for this space, I just was like, we got to have you on. So to Don's point, thank you, Don, who is my peer and colleague, and he's amazing and has a decorated career. Please check him out on LinkedIn. I won't read his bio, but I couldn't do this without Don. And Mike Burkholz, for those of you who don't know, and Danielle Graham, who are government leads on this working group. They should be joining us later. The IoT Smart Infrastructure Working Group is part of the emerging technology community of interest. If you are familiar with the ACT-IAC lingo, our colleague, Miss Nancy Delanoche, who's amazing, is on, and you can learn a lot. If you're interested in participating, please check it out. It's all about public-private partnership. Our working group, I'm going to read some of our mission, is we're focused on sustainability challenges related to critical infrastructure sectors. Think of the 16 in our country, where stakeholders across government, industry, and academia come together in this working group to celebrate the inventiveness, the sharing of best practices, and frankly, how can we move the needle in government as a community and not rely on simply compliance to do so. And what we do on this monthly session is feature companies that are not here to sell, but to tell. And Mike Ryder, who is going right there, the Senior Sales Engineer Federal from Menlo Security. I'm going to let Mike introduce himself in a minute, but go look him up on LinkedIn, folks. He's been around this space for over 21 years. He served our country. Thank you for your service, Mike. I say it and will continue to say it. He was an information systems technician, cryptological warfare officer in the U.S. Navy and U.S. Navy Reserve. Mike has worked with agencies and organizations, National Security Agency, U.S. Strategic Command, White House Communications Agency, and now is a great get for the Menlo Security team. We're going to talk a little bit about zero trust, browser isolation. I'm going to throw a few terms out because we will explain. Highly evasive adaptive threats, secure access, service edge, also known as SASE, cloud-based internet isolation, because that is something that everybody in this community, and if there's somebody there, they've got their phone on, if they can go on mute, that would be great. I think that might be Todd. I don't know if that's you, but thank you. You're the man. Mike Ryder is going to talk about how a lot of this effort towards securing this post-pandemic world we live in is being powered by capabilities that, by the way, are highlighted also in special publication NIST 800-207. So with that, Mike Ryder, a little bit about you, your journey, your passion, and why you love this space so much.
Sure. Thanks, Pete, and thanks for having me here today. I love talking about Menlo Security and browser isolation and what we do for our customers with that capability. A little bit about me, you've kind of touched on the highlights, but spent almost 21 years serving our country in the U.S. Navy, U.S. Navy Reserve, information systems technician, as well as a cryptologic warfare officer. And For those of you that aren't familiar with that field covers cyber warfare, electronic warfare, as well as signals intelligence. And I'm thankful for the career I had. It definitely exposed me to a lot of challenges and a lot of great people. And I learned a lot about the technologies that the government uses along that way. In parallel to my career in the Navy Reserve, particularly the last 10, 11 years, I've worked at a couple of different vendors. So 7.5 years I spent at WebSense, which later became ForcePoint. I spent most of my time there working in technical account management as well as sales engineering, supporting federal customers. But there was a 1-year stint where I also supported Fortune 500 companies, which was a really good experience because they are also a very mission focused and oriented caliber of people and organizations. So they also push the envelope just like our federal customers do. Following ForcePoint, spent a couple of years at Tanium, again, working in technical account management as well as solution engineering, supporting DoD and IC customers. And then 9 months ago, I made the jump to Menlo Security, and I did so because I experienced what Menlo delivers to the DoD personally as a user of browser isolation, sitting on duty at US Strategic Command one weekend and started browsing the web. And I noticed that the performance was better, but also the security efficacy was greater than ever before. Of course, from there, I began digging a little deeper and I was blown away by the capability. I saw they had an open position for a federal engineer and I immediately applied that Sunday, sitting on duty. And the rest is history. Here I am today. And there isn't a day goes by where I'm not excited or happy to evangelize and talk about the capabilities that we have to offer, but specifically what we're doing in arguably the largest and most demanding environment out there, and that is the Department of Defense. So that's a little bit about me, Pete.
Great. And for our working group, we're going to save some time at the end. I will monitor the reactions. If you have a question, raise your hand. We have 23 minutes essentially, and obviously we want to not make this one-way conversation, but we're going to try to hit on some components. And Mike's such a storyteller that he is. Great to see you, Darren Curtis, as well. We want to make this real for our Beltway community, but how the impact in the commercial world. We emphasize in this working group the critical infrastructure sectors. The bipartisan infrastructure law, we all know, is really pushing innovation and modernization, but security for cyber, physical, and network systems is paramount. Menlo Security really strikes me as a very unique company in that, your approach, and these are your words, to security is built on zero trust principles and leveraging isolation as a core architectural pillar. It's the only way to truly eliminate malware, secure work, and protect productivity. Folks, those are words that Mike and I have exchanged and talked about, but they're the same types of, it's the same language that's being captured. And again, NIST 800-207, specifically in section 3.23, where it says, excuse me, depending on how an enterprise network is set up, multiple zero trust architecture deployment models may be in use for different business processes in one enterprise. And it goes on to say that the primary benefit of specific models is that software components do not need to be installed on client devices. This is where throughout today, hopefully, and as you research Mike and his background, is the office is essentially, and we know this, has become a browser. We work from home, we work remote. So some of the terminology we're going to use today, it's not specific to Menlo. They have just figured out, obviously, like a lot of the companies that we celebrate, to create value propositions. So with that, Mike, can you talk a little bit about, in layman's speak, the relationship of zero trust with browser isolation, maybe describing browser isolation in your own words?
Yeah, so let me start with describing what browser isolation is in the most dumbed down way possible. And I'm going to steal an analogy that a coworker of mine used. And it really starts out with a question. And the question is, have you ever heard about that guy that caught a cold from someone on a Zoom meeting? The answer is obviously no, right? And this is the perfect way or an analogy to describe using an isolated browser or browser isolation. So you can't catch malware from a website over an isolated session for the same reason you can't catch a cold across a Zoom meeting. The isolation bit gap, that virtual air gap between the user and their destination, that's what keeps the user safe from any malicious content that might be on the web. So browser isolation extends that to any URL that you browse to through isolation. we're treating the content as malicious. We're not trying to just take a detect and respond approach where we're letting the data into the organization and then spending a millisecond trying to determine if it can be trusted and delivered to the user. We're simply locking the door, we're stopping the content in its tracks, treating it as malicious, and then delivering that or a safe sanitized version, or really a mirrored copy of the content they're trying to access to the end user. So effectively every single time they navigate the web or open a file or even open an email attachment and click on a link, they are going to be completely protected against any sort of threat, whether it's ransomware, malware, or a zero-day exploit. So that being said, the way I described it in terms of zero trust, we're not trusting the data, period. We're never allowing the user to access the original content. They're getting our safe, sanitized, mirrored copy of the content they're trying to access every single time. So in terms of zero trust, we absolutely can check that box. We adhere to the principles of zero trust, unlike your legacy detect and respond tools that are frankly contrary to zero trust, right? They're trusting the data and then trying to determine if it can be further trusted and delivered to the end user, which is a flawed approach. So that's the way I would describe isolation and zero trust.
Wonderful. And Mike, just hearing it like a second time in another flavor, it is helping crystallize, a capability, which again, folks, he's speaking from the need that the government, because of, this world we live in where people are literally in their home and that is their office using a browser to communicate. We want to sleep well at night knowing that as we're searching over any web interface, that data and that information, can be as secure as needed. Another term I want to bring out, Mike, because you talk a lot about this, is this highly evasive adaptive threats domain, also known as HEAT. Hackers know that people are working more remotely than ever before, turning browser windows into these threat vectors. You hit the importance of looking at the browser differently. You define browser isolation, appreciate that. But the cloud-based internet isolation, CBII effort that DISA has really emphasized, cloud-based, internet isolation. Can you talk about how now the government, is really embracing through the Defense Department a focus on this, and which is why obviously NIST has developed its recommendations at 800-207. So talk about the CBII program.
Sure. So for those of you that aren't familiar, CBII, and Pete mentioned already, is cloud-based internet isolation. It's a DoD program that came about a few years ago because they needed to transform their unclassified networks, specifically how the users were browsing the web. I mentioned already the legacy detect and respond approach is flawed. The DoD was no, they were keenly aware of the problems with that capability. They needed a better solution. So CBII went away from the legacy detect and respond approach to isolation, and specifically through Menlo's isolation platform, which was another intriguing factor of why I joined the company. Menlo is a small company compared to some of the big names out there, and I'm not going to mention those here, but you could probably, know what I'm talking about. And we deliver isolation to 3.5 million users, which effectively removes the web browser as a threat vector inside the DoD. There's also other benefits that are being delivered through isolation. That's better performance. There's enablement aspects, efficiencies, because with isolation, the fact that we are treating everything as malicious and delivering to the end user a safe experience, organizations can now open up the floodgates, if you will, to allowing their users to access more sites. Think about the uncategorized sites or social media sites, personal email, those sites that fall into that gray area that traditionally your legacy detect and respond tool would just simply block because there was no good way of safely delivering that to the end user. So based on the success of CBII, CISA also recently released a capacity enhancement guide. I believe it was in November, referencing CBII, specifically browser isolation inside the DoD, and recommending that federal agencies adopt or consider that as a part of a strategic architectural enhancement to meet the pillars of zero trust. Now, in terms of threat mitigation inside the DoD, it's pretty significant. So in 2021 alone, DISA released a year in review video where they highlighted nearly 40 million threats were mitigated. Fast forward to this year, and obviously there's a lot going on in the world. that is now increased to almost 50 million threats per month that are being mitigated through our platform. So pretty significant as far as threat protection is concerned, particularly when you look at the legacy solution that was, who knows how many of those threats we're getting in, right? So this is certainly a game-changing technology for the DoD and other customers that are employing browser isolation.
You know, to augment Mike's point, and I have a couple factoids that, you know, again, you just have to research browser isolation, folks. And again, it's like zero trust. Every agency is building their implementation plans. It's the sexy term that agencies are saying yes, and companies are going, we can help you with your zero trust. I have always viewed zero trust as it's an architecture, right? It's a capability you build into your environment based on, you know, your own risk posture. And this is, again, I have to give a shout out to the Executive Order on Securing the Nation's Cybersecurity 14028, Cybersecurity Framework out at NIST, and of course 800-207. Folks, when you read these documents, zero trust, cloud, web-based application, software as a service, you know, secure access service edge, also again known as SASE, which is, if I may, a technology used to deliver wide area network and security controls as a cloud computing service directly to the source of connection rather than a data center. And that's one definition. And Mike, you know, given the background and you know, there's another wonderful quote here that says, you know, there's a Google report that said that end users spend an average of 75% of their workday using a web browser. I mean, you mentioned ransomware. I mean, we've seen in this world, ransomware is real. People click and download, but this idea of a safe harbor and enclave known as browser isolation is obviously something that I hope those that sell into the government and those that buy make an emphasis on that specific capability. So with that, you know, Mike, it's you know, is there a use case in commercial or in government where you're having traction for that unique capability desired by an agency you can talk to?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, isolation, while it protects against all sorts of threats, it's really about removing the weakest link in the cybersecurity equation, right? And we all know the human is the weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity. They are the one that, despite how well your security stack might be, they're going to be the one that punches that hole in your security perimeter and allows malicious code access to your network and your sensitive data. With isolation, we isolate the end user. So when you look at today's hybrid workforce or remote workforce, generally they're able to sort of push the boundaries as far as what they can do. Organizations are leaving it up to the user in some cases to determine which sites to go to, which links to click on, what attachments to open up. But with isolation, organizations don't have to worry about that anymore because we're removing the user from the equation. We're stopping all malicious content, whether they intentionally go to that site, intentionally open that file, or accidentally open the file, or in the case of, you said already, the heat attacks, highly invasive adaptive threats. These types of attacks are able to bypass nearly a decade or more of cybersecurity tooling. So it doesn't matter how well the security tool is or how trained your user is, it's going to get through. Isolation stops all those threats, but more importantly, like I said, it isolates the end user from making a bad mistake or trying to do something intentionally bad that could impact not only their system, but the organization at large. And you mentioned already, a user spends about 75% of their day in a web browser, but not only that, 2 hours of that time is typically spent browsing the web for non-mission or non-business related purposes, for entertainment purposes, right? And that obviously can bring in or draw additional risk to the end user and expose himself to some sort of malicious content.
And thank you, Mike. And again, I'm, you know, folks, if you have a question, please use the hand raising capability at the bottom. Happy to bring you into the conversation in some structured manner. You know, a really interesting ransomware factoid came up in my reviews, and that was that there's a company, Cybersecurity Ventures. They point to ransomware impacting businesses every 11 seconds in 2021. Seconds, okay? And the frequency of these attacks are projected to accelerate to every 2 seconds by 2032. That could equate to $20 billion in costs associated with ransomware in 2021 and up to $265 billion in 2031. Now, that was a lot of numbers, but that is, to me, the reality, right? Colonial Pipeline, any other ransomware situation, the one that almost happened in Florida. we depend on the capability and the technologies that we have. The government's doing its part, obviously, to push out guidance and mandates on, in this case, zero trust. I implore and encourage anyone on this working group, or if you're serving a customer in the federal agency, work with your chief information security officers and make them aware of capabilities they need to be thinking about as they build out a zero trust architecture. So, shout out. And again, we have these wonderful guidance artifacts from DISA. You can Google CBII, as Mike brought out. And I know I was in the DOE yesterday, and I happened to mention, or somebody said, hey, I see you're interviewing Menlo Security on your working group. And they said, those are great guys. So Mike, for you and Darren, shout out for obviously the impact you're having. With that, I did tell my friend and colleague, Henry, I'm going to call on him, but really we've got 9 minutes and we like to save a minute or two for Mike and his parting shots. If there is a question that you'd like to ask, go off mute and direct it directly at Mike. He's here. And this won't be the last time you hear from him, but are there any questions at this moment? And I'll give it about 9 or 10 seconds, and then we'll jump into a topic. Here comes Henry.
Yeah, Pete, I'm sorry. You told me to ask a question, so I make sure I will. So Mike, great discussion. It's always good to hear about these technologies, and especially the way that I think you've got a fairly innovative approach to doing true isolation. Now, as Pete knows, I've been highly focused on critical infrastructure and the non-traditional OT environment. Is there a way could you do a bit of a discussion for us on how you approach, or Menlo Park approaches, securing the OT environment, not the traditional IT environment?
Yeah, so today we are focused on web isolation, whether it's browser isolation, cloud application security, things of that nature. So depending on what OT device you're trying to secure, that would probably be a discussion we need to have offline, because we're focused really on the web browser and different cloud applications and things of that nature. So unfortunately, I can't really give you a direct answer to OT type devices at this time.
Well, and if I can, just because I think, Mike, in our talk and Henry, maybe to your point, there's a lot of talk in 14028 about OT and IT integration. OT, for those on the call, just because I worked in arguably one of the most compelling operational technology focused agencies during my 25 years in government. Operational technology is the vital machinery that underpins our country. It's the water, the air, the defense industrial base. So Mike, if I may, I think the fact that you're, helping the Defense Department, you're helping a critical infrastructure sector in and of itself. And I do think that for all of us, in this working group, we're the IoT Smart Infrastructure Working Group for a reason. We believe that the Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things, the distributed energy resources, the water and wastewater treatment plants that are being hacked, the idea of integrating IT into those environments is something, to Henry's point, that is real time, happening now. How do we do that? And only one needs to look at 14028 to address that. So Mike Ryder, I think if there is maybe a one-off you and Henry want to have, maybe dive into some use cases, maybe that are in the commercial world, I think that would be encouraged. Does that help you out, Henry?
It does. I think maybe my follow-up is that, Mike, it appears, we're seeing this vast migration of the OT environment into the internet writ large, and the access points are very rapidly merging into the traditional browser-based environment. And I think Menlo Park solves that niche on access, secure access into this OT environment, as we have shifted these OT devices onto the internet writ large, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I haven't done a deep dive into Menlo Park, but that's what it appears you all can really solve nicely.
Really quickly, I love the reference to Menlo Park. It sends a message. They're Menlo Security, though, so don't be searching for Mike Ryder at Menlo Park. He is Menlo Security, so that's a funny.
Okay, I screwed up. I'm in the middle of grading right now.
Hey,
sorry,
man.
I'm taking a break from grading.
No, all good, all good. Hey, and look, please, if there's another question, just jump in. But Mike, the idea and what we're trying to convey, through this working group format, as Don would attest, is, this is the opportunity for you as well, Mike, to come into the ACT-IAC organization, either through the working group or community of interest, and share those stories. Telling the story of technical capability is one thing, but its impact on humanity, why it matters. As a user of the internet, as my mother is, as my children are, I can talk about browser isolation, and that, you got to be careful, but the best part is somebody, like a Menlo Security is doing that for you. So are there any, Mike, preliminary parting shots, things you want to convey that you just want to leave with the audience here that might entice or compel them to want to have another conversation with you?
Yeah, I would say the way I look at browser isolation, it's a unique security product that is able to deliver both performance, but also security. And I say that because the vast majority of security tools, right, you're having to sacrifice something in order to gain security, or vice versa. A lot of times security tools will, be resource hogs or make you change the way you perform your day job in order to gain security. With isolation, we deliver both enhanced performance, efficiencies, enablement, but all while giving you that full protection against any sort of threat. But if there is really one thing to leave, and I've said it multiple times, is while isolation delivers top-notch security, we're not going to let anything bad into the organization. At the end of the day, we remove the weakest link in cybersecurity, and that is the human. That is the constant. That is always going to be your problem child in your organization, no matter how well your cybersecurity stack may be. Isolation completely removes them, which puts you in a much better security posture and allows them to, more freely and safely do things like navigate the web, open up email attachments, because with isolation, they are completely protected no matter where they are located or what they're trying to access.
Great. And before I kick it back to Don to kind of just close this out, again, folks, quick fire. This is meant to simply highlight or spotlight amazing entrepreneurial spirit and passion, towards the world we're moving into, be it the workforce and leveraging IoT. I will just remind everybody, please check out NIST 800 Special Pub -207 or NIST SP 800-207, specifically section 323 on resource portal based deployment. This is being recorded, so you can watch it again if you didn't capture that. It literally is the one instantiation on page 25 where they call out browser isolation. And this is in the Zero Trust Architecture guidance document that has been published by NIST recently. So this is a real thing. It's a real capability. And thank you to Henry for even stating in the chat back to me that, any company, any organization, any agency that is looking to migrate its information technology capabilities into an OT environment, folks, critical infrastructure sectors, what DHS, what CISA promote and are pushing, and as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Menlo Security is the type of company you might want to take a look at. So thank you, Mike. You're the man. Let me kick it back to Don for some final comments.
I appreciate it. Wonderful presentation. And, you really shared a lot of great ideas that are practical and can be implemented today. I think the idea of moving the browser isolation out to something other than a maintenance nightmare makes a lot of sense. The idea that you get some security, a lot of security as part of that is awesome. I did want to offer a chance. Nancy De La Roche is on, and Nancy is really coordinating our ACT-IAC activities in the emerging tech working groups. I put her email on the chat window. So if anybody would like to join ACT, learn more about the working groups, please feel free to email Nancy. And Nancy, if you want to come off mute, or Todd, and share a little bit about some of the emerging tech groups, love to take a minute for that.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Pete, for the wonderful program. And as I've mentioned, this working group is part of the larger Emerging Technology COI. And we have several work groups under it on AI, blockchain, intelligent automation. We kicked off a new one on quantum. And if you're interested in this or any of those topics and would like to join the working groups, let me know and I can add you to their distro list. The ETCOI will have an in-person meeting, our first time since the pandemic, on Tuesday, and it will be at the IBM Center for Government downtown. I hope you can join us. It'll be a chance to meet the COI leaders, and hopefully some of our working group leaders can attend that as well. It's a great place to meet new friends, network, and learn more about improving trust in government, presented by our friends from the IBM. I hope to see you there. And emerging technology is just one of the 8 COIs that we have. We have a cyber COI as well. I know there's a lot of intersection between IoT and cyber. So I encourage you to check them out as well and consider joining them. They have a member meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m. and it's virtual. Let me know if you're interested and I can connect with that group as well. All the COI meetings, all the working group meetings are always free to all ACT-IAC members. So please take advantage of those opportunities. Thank you. Back to you, Don.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Todd, any last minute thoughts before we close out?
This is great, guys. I'm so glad that you're able to pull something together like this. We're just in the process too of putting our annual plans together, so more stuff like this would be awesome. And thank you, Menlo Park folks, for joining. This is great. Please reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. I'm happy to engage with you guys for any future activities too.
Great. Our next event like this will be in September, so stay tuned for a meeting announcement. Thanks all and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.